Welcome to London Live Debate with Raya El Salehi. This is the programme taking a deeper look at the stories making headlines in the capital and the issues at the heart of life in the city. The question up for debate this evening: are millennials too easily offended? Hundreds of people gathered outside Downing Street this afternoon to demonstrate their support for the Me Too and Time's Up women's rights movements. The rally comes in the week Conservative Vice Chair Kemi Badenoch spoke out against young people's unrealistic views of sexual harassment. The former London Assembly member said the younger generation's response to recent controversy shows something has gone wrong somewhere. So, are young Londoners too thin-skinned for their own good? Or are older people out of touch when it comes to what constitutes appropriate sexual behaviour? Well, joining me to share their thoughts on this, a panel of straight-talking, opinionated Londoners. First up, Abianca Makoni, a young writer focusing on political and social affairs. Next, the entrepreneur, author and proud millennial, Rafael dos Santos. And joining us a little later in the programme, currently held up by traffic, Dr. Diane Rainier, women's rights activist and the founder of the domestic abuse charity SWIM, which stands for Strength Within Me. So expecting Diane to join us a little later in the show. Welcome to London Live Debate.
Thank you for inviting us.
Now, before we get into things, let's start by looking at what Kemi Badenoch actually said. Speaking to the House magazine, the MP who's tipped as a possible future Tory leader had this to say: when I look at a lot of the stuff that you see on social media about how younger people look at appropriate behaviours and what's a sexual advance and what's sexual harassment and so on, to me it's actually becoming a lot more puritanical. She went on to say in the papers they were talking about how Friends is now a sort of really homophobic, transphobic and so on. I genuinely don't understand where a lot of people are coming from. Something has gone wrong somewhere. So, Rafael, to you first. What do you make of Kemi Badenoch's comments? Do you agree?
Well, to a certain extent. Friends, for example, her comments about Friends, I think what was acceptable in the 90s, it might not be accepted today. 20 years later, there are certain jokes that were made before, and they're no longer acceptable. I think things change and generations change, and I think obviously millennials are much more conscious of things that what should be said and should not be said, and things that should be accepted. Like, people don't allow jokes. I'm gay. I don't like gay jokes. Right? I'm sure it's the same, about black jokes. And I think this is something that millennials made it very clear that we are vocal when it comes to inequality. And I agree with her comments in Friends. There are lots of jokes that are made there that are unacceptable. I think it's a little bit extreme to say that, it's puritanical and it's too black and white. And, that is a generation issue where I think older people probably they accepted things much more because they were scared of losing their jobs or and millennials don't have that issue. There is no such thing as job for life for millennials. So we will not accept certain things that our parents and our grandparents accepted. So I think that's where the big debate, the big problem is.
We'll get into that in more detail a little later. Abianca, for you, when you heard these comments, young people being described as too puritanical when it comes to sexual harassment, what did you think?
I definitely disagree. I think that the younger generation are at an advantage now because the older generation have told more of their stories and their experiences and what they went through, which gives us the freedom and the platform to also share our views. And I think that there are different aspects of sexual harassment. It's not just one thing or another. It's very broad. So to say that, we are narrow-minded or puritanical is a bit too extreme. I think that as our younger generation, we're much more aware of what is a sexual harassment and what is not. So,
you say much more aware. There have been people who've come out to agree with Kemi Badenoch's comments. They've said that young people, particularly millennials, are just too thin-skinned, that we're too easily offended. We're all millennials on this panel, I think I'm right in saying.
Yes. So millennials, just to make sure that people are aware, millennials are people that were born in between 1980 and 2000. So, which are people that are going to be turning 40 very soon. So I'm 37, I'm a millennial. And people get very surprised when I say I'm a millennial, probably I look too old, but people think that millennials are 20, they're not. Okay, so that's in this age bracket.
Given that you are within the age bracket, do you accept that idea that you might be a bit too easily offended.
Absolutely
and that's the
not.
problem.
No, I think the difference now is that I will not take things that my parents and, as I said, my grandparents would take. I will retaliate, and I will be vocal, because if there are certain things that are unacceptable, why should I take it? Why should I just listen and then don't do anything and don't say anything, right?
The MP Kemi Badenoch talked about Friends, the US TV series, and the criticism that it's come under, particularly recently from younger millennials who talked about it being transphobic, homophobic, sexist. And she essentially says that she finds it amazing that people are complaining about this. Do you watch the series and think that now?
I think that obviously times have changed, and nowadays, would I say that the younger generation are sensitive? No, but I would say that more freedom of speech. So if they see something that they may find offensive, they're going to say it. And I personally think it's a good thing, because we should be able to point out what we don't think is right or what we personally feel offended by. But in terms of Friends, I did watch some of the episodes, and I think that it was important that they touched on certain episodes. For example, one with a transgender. They explained how one of the characters felt embarrassed by their father being transgender. But I think it's actually showcasing the reality of some children. They go through certain journeys where their parents have transitioned, and it's very difficult. So I think there are certain episodes which are very important that they showcased, because it explains the journey that someone goes through having either gay parents or transgender parents.
Rafael, you mentioned yourself as a gay man, hearing people criticise series like Friends as homophobic. What do you make of that?
I think it depends on the joke. The same way that, if jokes that are made about blonde women, why only blonde women have to be stupid? So you have that. I know it sounds very silly, but this is the kind of thing that we have to change. We have to change the behavior. I think it all depends on the tone as well. Obviously, with friends, between friends, exactly. It's not an issue. But I think when you use in a way that it is to offend, that when it becomes an issue, and that's where, like for example, I was on the tube once, and there was a younger guy, and he was being bullied. I was very bad bullied at school, so I stood up, and it made me really angry, and I stood up and I defended him, because I thought, it is my job now today to make sure that other people are not allowed to just say what they like. So when it comes to jokes about about gay men, or about blacks, or about blonde women, I think they're no longer acceptable. And I think what was happening in Friends is they were acceptable in the 90s, and they were super funny.
Yeah.
But now we have another level of consciousness that actually, it's derogative, it's not good, they're not acceptable anymore. So Friends should not be showing.
Moving away from the US TV series Friends, which was one of the examples that Ms. Badenoch highlighted in this piece, she also talked about sexual harassment, and how young people have this puritanical view towards sexual harassment that's almost too strict, too moralistic. And that idea that you mentioned, a spectrum of actually... this comes in all varieties. It's important to note that. What do you make of this idea that we're too quick to label something as sexual harassment, when actually maybe it's just a sexual advance?
I think her statement is very wrong, because she may not realise how much it can affect the younger generation, because it does take bravery to even state what your experience was, or like this is what happened. So for someone to hear that, it's a bit like, are you belittling us? Are you patronising us? Like, we should be able to state that we felt uncomfortable, we lost our dignity because of this advance, or because of this, harassment. I don't think that she realises that it's not just one aspect of it. There are many, and we should be able to just state what it is.
And I think that there's a difference there, when it's sexual advancement because people are the same age and someone likes the other without touching or anything, and obviously you will know if someone fancies you, and I think there is a difference there. I think when it comes to harassment, where a lot what was happening is powerful people taking advantage of younger people because of their jobs, because of what they want to be, in the fashion industry, in the film industry. I think that is wrong, and that should be brought up. And it was brought up mainly by millennials, mainly for people in their 30s, who are now, they don't have a problem about being vocal. So I think in that case, people should be vocal, but they should not be mixing up with sexual advantage because someone, one fancy the other, and you are in the pub talking, and then a guy says, oh, you are very beautiful. this is not sexual harassment.
But I think that perhaps the younger generation needs to be educated more in it, because it's a situation where have we then been taught the differences, or have we, like, the issues have just now risen up and we're talking much more about it. But for example, if you say in the education system, are we talking about these? Do we have, I don't know, lessons, seminars where we can say, okay guys, this is how you approach a situation, or these are the differences, We don't necessarily have that education for it, or we're not educated, or we don't have that knowledge. So of course, some people may say, oh, I've been sexually harassed, where maybe it wasn't advanced. But do you necessarily blame them, or do you blame society in general for not teaching us these different things?
Really interesting point. We're going to go into this in more depth in just a moment, but we are almost heading to a break. Let me just say quickly, though, throughout the show, whether you agree or disagree with what you've heard so far from the panel, do get in touch, share your thoughts. We're on social media at London Live. Just use the hashtag London Live Debate. OK, we're heading for a short break now, but still to come.
What time is it? What time is it?
Do the hundreds of activists who marched through the capital against sexual harassment and gender inequality today have an unrealistic expectation of life in the real world? The discussion continues after this short break. Welcome back to London Live Debate with me, Raya El Salehi. Joining me on tonight's panel, the social affairs writer Abianca Marconi and the entrepreneur Rafael dos Santos. Now, this evening, the question up for debate: are millennials too easily offended? It's an issue sparked by comments made by the Conservative MP Kemi Badenoch this week. The former London Assembly member said that young people have a puritanical view of sexual harassment. But her comments come as hundreds of activists gathered outside Downing Street today to demonstrate their support for the Me Too and Time's Up movements. So clearly a diverse range of views on this. But do the sorts of people joining the rally in central London today and millennials, like our panel, have an unrealistic expectation of life in the real world? Abianca, what do you make of that? Do you have an unrealistic view of what you can expect to happen in the real world?
No, of course not. But I don't necessarily think that's due to society, because I feel like society hasn't necessarily helped me with that. I think it's my own doing from research and some of the things I've experienced myself or family members. I feel as if those that don't have a realistic view of the real world haven't been educated on it. And this can go from maybe within their families that haven't been able to mentor them or teach them more about the real world, and back to the education system. I always say, we spend most of our lives going through education from primary school all the way to uni, and of course we're taught the simple stuff like math, science, etc. But do we have those lessons that teach us about societal issues or more about what's going on in the real world? No, we don't. And I think that's a big problem that we kind of need to delve into.
And is there a sense, Rafael, as a result of that millennials have kind of created a world that they would like to see, and they're telling everyone this is the world as it should be rather than the world as it is?
Well, I think the world, it is as it is, depending on, is this your one world, right? And I think what is happening is a shift, in society. We had the baby boomers and, all the issues that came after the Second World War, and they had to rebuild, and then they had to... But now, things are much easier, life is easier, technology, so there's a lot there for people to think, well, life is actually easier. People don't have to fight anymore for rights, right? So they don't have to riot. Women can vote, gay men can get married, and so we have all that people had to fight in the past before. I think that's why people sometimes they say millennials take everything for granted in a way. Well, we do, because we didn't have to fight for all that. I think what we have to do now is to make sure that there is equality, for example. I think that's the biggest shift that is happening. We are not accepting things as much as the previous generation did, for fear, for whatever it was, because that's how the time was at the time.
Do you think, with that in mind, you can almost sympathise with older generations when they're angry about millennials just taking the world almost kind of too easily, that they assume that the rights they have, they should have, and they don't question it? When you've had generations, particularly gay men, who've had to fight, very big battles in the past, and they might see things now where they think you've got it too easy.
I totally agree. I didn't have to fight, and I'm married today. Thank to those people that fought in the past. But I think what is happening now is we are fighting for the right to say, no, you can't make advances, you can't make sexual advances, no, you can't make black jokes, no, you can't make you cannot make people feel belittled, you cannot make people feel in a way inferior. So I think it's not the level of consciousness that is happening, that that the millennials are making this change today, and which is very different from whatever happened after the Second World War and what happened with the baby boomers. It's a different shift that is happening in mentality, I think, thanks to information, thanks to social media, and people being able to have much more access to information.
We're talking about this because of the comments made by the Conservative MP, Kemi Badenoch. She's not alone in her criticism of millennials. Well, actually, we've worked out today, I think she is a millennial.
Yes, she's 37. So she's
criticising herself.
And,
that said, the sort of attacks that you hear on millennials, the so-called snowflake generation, as being less resilient than older generations, being too emotionally vulnerable to cope with the real world, and also too emotionally vulnerable to cope with views that challenge their own. What do you make of that? Are we too emotionally vulnerable as millennials?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I think you should answer for us.
I think if we were, we wouldn't be here discussing it. I think if we were, people wouldn't be on the streets today fighting. You know, I think there is a backlash. If she said something, like the MP said, and she will get backlashed by, okay, no, we're not going to take everything, you know, just because we are lazy or because we're accepting. So she can see that all this response that she had is great, which goes completely against her comments, I think. I think we are proving that we're not lazy, we're not taking things for granted, and we want change. And I think that's very important.
Is a generational divide at the heart of this? Is that the problem that you've got?
I believe so, yeah, completely. I think, don't you agree? I think she's a millennial way younger.
Much younger.
Even younger millennial.
Much younger.
Do you think there is a sense that generation is at the heart of it? That actually there's just very different views between someone that's in their 40s or 50s and someone your age?
Yeah, I think there are very different views, but not only that, but I feel like some people my age take certain things for granted. You know, the older generation works very hard for us to have some of the things that we do have. But for example, the younger generation are labelled as lazy and stuff like that. And at times we are, because we're so advantaged that we don't necessarily go out and try to get the job, go out and work.
So hold on, you're admitting that you're lazy here?
Not necessarily everyone, we can't generalise, but the majority, I feel as if like they take certain things for granted, which, you know, which kind of may make the older
life
generation
is easier. You know, life is easier for millennials. It's reality in first and even developing countries. I'm from Brazil. You know, life is easier today in Brazil than was 20 years ago, and in Europe is way easier.
Much easier.
So that's why it's not that people are lazy. It's just because you were born with all these facilities, so you don't have to work hard. You know, like for example, people say that millennials don't stick to jobs. I think there is a sense of purpose that millennials have that, first of all, we don't have jobs for life. There is no such thing anymore as jobs for life. And if there isn't a purpose, if I'm not doing something that is not just for me, but if there isn't a greater good, I'm going to move jobs. Right?
Does our generation in London deserve more respect with that in mind? That we're having almost, by the sounds of it, a harder time than the generation before us in terms of, you know, settling into a job for life, getting a house, all those things that perhaps came easier to older generations. Do we deserve more respect?
I feel as if things were slightly easier back then in terms of jobs. You know, now everyone wants to be a doctor, because we have that education that, you know, we can get to being a doctor, but there are so many people that want certain things that not everyone is going to get it. So it is quite difficult. And like you said, everyone has a purpose now. You know, you don't want to do a job that you won't be happy in, you know, so you may turn down certain jobs and not work for a while just to get to the end of your actual goal.
And just adding to that, competition is very hard. In the US, there were 80 million millennials, right, alone. So by 2048, we will be one of the biggest generations ever, with 49% of the world being millennials. So, you know, all these people then we're going to start having babies and it's going to change. I think what we are doing now as millennials, we are creating a shift for the next generation, where the next generation, there won't be sexual issues, there won't be black and white issues, there won't be the blonde, Bambi lady, you know, like jokes like that, because it's no longer acceptable. And what will be acceptable, you know, you will have a transgender friend and you're not going to say, this is my transgender friend. This is a friend. It's no longer, gender is not going to be, but the shift is happening now. So that's why this whole thing about transgender is happening like it happened 10 years ago with the gay world, right? So I think the shifts needs to happen for the world to be better.
I mean, with the greatest respect, without wanting to, kill off huge swathes of the population, is there a sense that the only way things are going to change is for that older generation, I'm sorry to say, but to die out? Is there a sense that we're not going to change the views of people who are a lot older?
I think they're very stagnant in their views and they're not willing to kind of work with society and change with society. There are a lot of things which are changing socially and culturally, and I feel as if, the older generation are still stuck in their, traditional ways and not willing to change their mentality. So if they can do that, then perhaps we can move forward. But if they're not willing to do that, then perhaps...
Not all of them, though, because
yes.
my mother-in-law is about 60 and, she uses WhatsApp, and I was teaching her how to use the iPhone. I think those that adopt technology, for example, and they can go into the millennial world, I think it would be way easier to accept. Obviously, they will always think that it was better in that time. I hear that from my mom all the time, and she's 60. But for us, I think, in my opinion, what is really happening is the shift into mentality. And I think only in 10 years' time, really, we're going to see the results completely, because people will keep, they will keep fighting for it.
Afraid to say we are almost out of time. It's been great to have you both on the show this evening, and afraid to say that is almost it from us. Many thanks to panellists Rafael dos Santos and Abianca Marconi, and of course, to you at home for watching. London Live Debate returns live at 5:30 on Sunday, the 11th of February. See you again then.